I'd like to welcome you all to our 2020 Volunteer Tea. This recording is a compilation of it, and thanks to all who participated to try to help make it the best we could have. Have a happy new year. And I hope now you've enjoyed looking at some of the preparation and the beautiful teacups that were used for the party. And then we'll join the discussion partway through with Marty Armstrong.
But I found out that the Moravians, you look them up, where exactly is Moravia anyway? Well, it's in Central Europe someplace, kind of German, kind of, sort of not German, kind of near Germany, German speaking probably. They were known as Protestants before 1517. They were before the Reformation, and they were proto-Protestants. And they came to Pennsylvania in great numbers. They were persecuted in Europe, and they came in great numbers in the eastern part of the state, lots of German-speaking people, and so on and so on. So that's how come we have Moravian missionaries. And then in the 1930s, well, from 1900 to 1930, we had a whole family of siblings, 2 men, 2 women, 3 medical doctors, and a nurse who were medical missionaries in China. And they were from outside of Frostburg, Nancy. And right over there behind where Perry Church used to be.
Okay.
Up the Hamilton-Markton Road.
And the name?
Lewis. And I only knew about the one because somebody wrote a book about him, because he had written all his reports home to the Missionary Society, Presbyterians, and somebody thought he was a wonderful guy, and they wrote up his life story and so on. But then I found out, well, gee whiz, he had a brother who was a doctor, a sister who was a doctor, another sister who was a nurse, and they all went to China, different places. And they were there from about 1900 to the 1930s. And so we have that episode. And then we have Nancy Pfeiffer's great aunt, Catherine Pfeiffer, who sort of during the same time period up until about 1940 was in Japan. And she had studied, and she was raised in Henderson Township, I guess.
Actually,
Oh, McKelvey, excuse me, McKelvey.
but they change,
Yeah, the lines.
the lines change.
Yeah, right. And she had studied as a young woman to be a teacher, so when she went to Japan, she was a teacher, I gather, of children. And she had to leave at the onset of World War II because of the Japan-U.S. conflict, and she had to come home. And I guess the U.S. government approached her to be a spy, which she refused to do because they were her friends, so that didn't happen. So and then in modern times we have other instances. What do we have down at St. Peter and Paul Church? We have a young man and his family from Ukraine, who was the priest there. And he told me when the church was on the Holly Tour several years ago, he said when he was in seminary in Ukraine, he learned that various places in the U.S. needed people like him. So he had no English. He came to the U.S. with his family. He spent some time in Florida attempting to learn English, which he did very well, I guess. He speaks very well. And then he came here, and his picture is over there. And then if you go to Sprinkle Mills, we have a young lady, Erin McFarland, and her husband is Joel Rodriguez from the Dominican Republic, and they serve as missionary hosts to short-term groups that come from the U.S. So we have quite a missionary thing. So the question, the little trivial question on here that I haven't really answered is what I spoke about. It says, after 1492, European rulers with seaworthy ships set out to acquire wealth abroad. Where exactly was New France?
Louisiana territory or Quebec?
Indonesia?
Quebec,
Quebec.
parts of Canada.
Okay, yeah.
There's still a French-speaking
Yes.
segment of Canada that's primarily French.
When they do Louisiana territory?
Well, that's an interesting point, because if you look at a map from about the time of the mid-1500s, it shows North America, all of the Great Lakes, the major part of Canada, the whole way around the Great Lakes, the whole way down the Mississippi and all of its tributaries, the whole way to the Caribbean, which is where we get New Orleans and Louisiana and all those French-type cities, because they traveled up the waterways. They were rivermen,
Yes.
primarily. And so, actually, we're sitting in New France. Because the map of New France showed the territory that they claimed. If you doubt that, there's Fort Presque Isle, Fort Le Boeuf, Fort Marchal, I don't know how you say it, Fort Duquesne, to establish their legitimacy in the western part of this area. Because, you know, the British colonies were clinging to the coast. I mean, that's the reality.
Everything from the Mississippi.
And it was this conflict between France and England, which France lost, that meant that we're not now part of New France, but we were part of New France, no question about it. So, you know, up until 1759 or 8, whatever, the end of the French and Indian War. Okay, moving on. Public community services, that's the gold tree, that's the heart of it. There are so many people that volunteer their time or volunteer their careers to a lifetime of service to others. And that includes military and a lot of other things, includes missionary, includes church work, includes, and then there's a lot of 501c3 organizations, and there's a lot of churches, and there's a lot of community service work that is going on. So I'm thinking, what kind of a quiz question can I put down there? How many 501c3 organizations do you imagine there are in our zip code?
35.
35.
I don't know, why
The
would
bidding
yes,
goes higher.
Churches.
Let's hear a bigger number.
This includes churches, right?
Well, not all churches are necessarily 501c3. If you're already part of a broader nationwide organization, you don't have to apply for it
You
yourself.
don't have to apply, okay,
But
but,
if you're, yeah.
well, then maybe I'll bring it down.
So,
We know one for sure.
huh?
Somebody
Daily
take some of the
Foundation.
crazy.
The Daily Foundation is a 501c3 organization. So is a historical society. So are a lot of other things.
So I say 15.
Let's raise the numbers a little bit.
275.
1,000 is too high.
I was bringing it down without the church.
So I went to the internet to see what I could find, and I found a website.
Yes.
Put in your zip code, and you find out how many there hypothetically are as of 2021, I think was the date. And there's 140.
Oh,
Wow.
good.
Isn't that interesting? And of course, that doesn't even count Rossiter, Oliver,
Right.
Sprinkle Mills,
Yeah.
our surrounding townships that are really part of our area. You know?
Oh, my
So you have to assume quite a few more.
Oh, yeah.
goodness.
I think that's kind of fun.
That's-
And now you have to look at the picture of the red building.
Yeah, it's supposed to be yellow.
What did I hear about yellow?
It's supposed to be yellow.
It's supposed to, well, what is it?
It's the WPME building.
Is it
It's
WPME
the old
building?
it's the old hospital.
The old hospital?
It's
The
the
Puxatawny Hospital built by Dr. Grew, and then it became the radio
Oh,
building, and
okay.
it was
I was
also an
wondering.
aviation school,
And
it
did
was
they
also,
paint it yellow or was it
Photography.
used to be red?
photographer.
It was the time of postcards.
The bricks.
They changed it.
the postcards were
They changed it.
not printed in color photos, they were black and white photos that were colorized.
Yeah.
And
they
whoever did the colorizing
colorized
assumed that if it was a brick
it was
building,
red.
I guess it's
Yeah.
gonna be red.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I
We
know.
know a lot about colorizing because Tom told me one time that when he was in high school, he worked for the White Studio and colorized portraits.
Wow.
Because back in the day, when I graduated, we still only had black and white pictures, and if I wanted a color one to give to mom and daddy,
Yeah.
it had to be tinted,
It was-
colored.
It was painted that way.
Yes, they were painted,
Yeah,
explain
I
color.
remember my mom
Yeah,
told me
yeah,
that.
yeah.
My pictures were painted.
That was from one of his
My
high school,
high
his
My high
student
school
worker
pictures
share.
were
Oh,
painted.
really? Okay.
It wasn't, it was taken in a
Probably did
studio and
me.
it would have been black and white. And they-
Me
they-
too.
they-
I don't know about that.
But this is
So,
because at the same time that hospital was built in the early 1900s, 1907, is when this building, if you look around and see how much of this red brick is in Punxsutawney.
Yes.
Yeah.
there's plenty
Somebody
of
was
red
assuming
brick.
that was a red brick building,
Building.
and not the yellow brick that we all know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
If you
his
look at the
house-
black and white photos, you don't know it's yellow brick until you go down on North Gilpin Street and see it.
Right, and in the lower left corner, part of it is cropped off, but you can see a horse and buggy there. So we know how old that picture is.
Oh.
Yeah, I was stuck on it being a fire hall, and I thought, well, there's a road there, and they did tear down a building.
They have a larger print of that.
And there's nothing wrong with the picture if there was that front porch, because that wraparound porch was typical of houses at that time.
Well, didn't Dr. Groove build the hospital?
He
out
built,
of the same-
he built
same
the
bricks that
that
he built
is
his house
that.
out of?
Yeah.
They used to be.
Yeah,
the
his house
Yeah,
is
that's
yellow
right.
bricks.
Okay, and so, so healthcare is the fourth tree down the road there. And so, from what we can find on the internet, lots of pictures of medical facilities now, lots of pictures from our files of medical facilities in the past, pictures on the internet now of current nursing staff and doctor staff and x-ray staff and a lot of other related healthcare items. And for all the trouble that these people have had to deal with in the last number of years, I think they're entitled to a tree, at least once. So I encourage everybody to look at those first 4 trees. And the big sign in the center is this theme for each one. And finally, we have police, fire, and rescue services, which is kind of balancing the military service. And so we have some state police troopers on horseback and some groupings of them. And we have borough police today. We have a number of Punxsutawney Phil's, fantastic Phil's sprinkled around town now. We have a military one down at the VFW. We have Fireman Phil up at the Civic Center, which Bill has done an interview with about. And there's that one down here at Lindsay Station, and there's one up at the Primary Health Network where Dr. Elder, Dr. Koenig have their facility. There's a medical bill. And so those are on there. And then for the fire companies, Punxsutawney is kind of a long strung out community, is it not? It's way down there, it's way up there, and we started out with just, 8 squares around where Barclay Square is, but, it grew, and it grew, and it grew, and it expanded its borough lines, and we had some mergers and so on.
And you had one section completely divided from the other because of the railroad.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, a serious problem.
And for the Elk Run area in particular. And so it turns out that we have 3 fire companies plus an umbrella company. The Punxsutawney Fire Department, I guess, encompasses all 3,
Yeah.
but we have Lindsay, and we have Central, and we have Elk Run. So, obviously Elk Run was not part of Punxsutawney originally, neither was Lindsay. Do we know when that changed?
Is Lindsay the same as Clayville?
Is that right?
Okay, Lindsay is
1907, Clayville?
1907 for
joined.
Clayville.
Yeah.
So if you want to verify it, in 1895, the guy went around and did bird's eye view drawings of various towns in Pennsylvania.
I was there all
In our
the
gift
time.
shop, we have the original
All the
paintings
time.
of Punxsutawney and Lindsay. side by side, before they were joined.
Yeah.
But they were joined in 1907 and signed by Governor Schaefer, the proclamation.
And we have the pen over at the other house.
The pen is over
We have the pen and the proclamation
Signed the
over at the other
proclamation.
house.
Well, because it was closer
And
to
actually, it was
downtown.
You had to have something back
Yeah.
then because
The
you
Clayville
had your major
first,
buildings
and then it was
stuff.
Lindsay because it was in
The
Claysville,
town.
someplace else in
They had
Pennsylvania. All the
fire
eastern
hydrants,
towns
but
got
there was a lot of-
dibs on the names apparently, because they were probably older.
Yeah,
And so we couldn't have Clayville, so we had to have something else, so we had
Yeah.
Lindsay.
And that was the
And then what about
grandson of
Dutchtown?
the
I mean, you know, where's that? There's a Dutchtown road up there.
And Lindsay,
Yeah.
Lindsay
Oh,
wasn't
that's
just
down,
selected
that's-
because
that's
it's
all.
Lindsay,
Yeah,
it's because it's related to the.
Yeah.
a family name.
I still call it Dutchtown.
Yeah,
Or whatever.
right.
Okay.
And so now about Elk Run, I had to ask Tom about this, and he looked this up. So who's got an idea of when that might have occurred? When were the borders of the borough expanded to include Elk Run and some other areas up in that?
It was early, we know that.
Yeah, earlier than 1907, let's put it that way. Oh, yes.
And Clayville was settled long before 1907.
Oh, yes.
As it grew, and so with Elk Run settling outside of the limits of Punxsutawney, long before it became a part of the whole.
Right. It's not like they took in open fields.
Yeah, that's right.
They took in an existing
Yeah,
community.
developed communities.
And Elk Run was developed back then, you're saying?
Yeah, there was a concern that some of these areas would become little towns, and Punxsutawney would just become a little place inside of all these little towns all around it, which it is now.
And
That's
yours,
why they
they went
decided
to business?
Punxsutawney was expanding
Well, just.
by the natural way people were spreading themselves out to settle. So they didn't want those places to become towns, so they incorporated some of those areas into the bigger Punxsutawney.
You're shopping.
And I gather from reading one of the ordinances that there were people in those outlying areas that petitioned to be part of the borough as well.
The discussion in Clayville started long before 1907. So if you're following what Du Bois and Sandy Township is doing up there, how many years it's gonna take to get it all together? The discussion, of people in Clayville, that they wanted to become a part of Punxsutawney was an issue, and some didn't, because they wanted it to be a separate little place in its own. It was a cute little town, just a couple miles down from Punxsutawney. But that was an issue long before they finally settled it, and that's when 1907 is the date.
Of course, you know, in the Civil War area, 1860s, when this house was built, that was Punxsutawney,
Yeah.
that was Clayville, and this was not either one of those.
So many of those other places were just simply called out of town.
Yeah, okay, so when did the trolley go up North Main?
1892.
So Clayville had part of the trolley system,
Yeah.
although they weren't part of Punxsy yet.
Right.
Well, right up Main Street,
It went-
down.
Right.
And it got down
And
to
the
North
trolleys
Main
were-
Street and Grace Way,
Yeah.
and they just turned the switch, so if the electrical power was going the other direction, and it turned around and went back up to East End.
And we still had them by about 1910 or so.
Oh, yeah, 1920s.
Okay, so Tom, the date for Elk Run,
It was in
1889.
9.
What's that?
They started, the date for Elk Run being incorporated as part of the borough,
1889.
What was the date again, Marty?
1889.
And just coincidentally, left out East End, as it was developed by the railroad coming in up in that area where the Pennsylvania Railroad Station was. And that was developing too by the railroad company. All those streets that you named, Cambria, Uniata, some of those streets up in East End, those were all built up by the railroad company. And they were named. But that was also brought into Punxsutawney in 1889. When the Mary A. Wilson School, the old school was built up there, that's when the railroad company gave Punxsutawney that piece of land where it was now to build a school for that whole area. That's when Punxsutawney pulled in at East End. And that's why you see the little shops along there yet, because that was developing as a little town all in itself. As Elk Run did, as Clayville did, I mean, but we all knew West End had its own little town. Okay, that's just extra.
Well, Shirley has something else, if you didn't lift up your big square plates, there's something underneath it that you might want to look at. And when you go today, don't leave until you have a closer look at the trees.
Once again, I'd like to thank all of our volunteers for the hard work they've done through the year and start to enjoy your new 2023.